Morning, John. Can you hear me?
Hey, Bob. Yes.
Oh, good. Oh, I was a little nervous there. Took a minute. It took a minute to connect. So
Yeah.
I tried to get on a minute or two early, so I'm going to go on mute for a minute, and I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay. Hey, Bob. Before you leave, you wanted to finish by 11, right?
Yeah, because I have another, prior commitment that was scheduled with a whole group of people that I run. So that'd be cool.
No problem.
Thank you, John.
All right.
All right, I'm going to go stand by for just a second.
Okay.
John, would you like to move the schedule around a little?
We should be okay.
Okay.
Oh, my cats. Oh, you're such a bad little bear.
I'm going to mute
Get
Andrew.
JC muted. Or is that Ann?
Yeah, we have no bears at my house, John.
Sounded like a school project. Sarah. Morning.
Hi, John.
John, can you hear me again?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Hey, so I just want to let you know that I'm standing in front of the computer right here, but the way my desk is set up, my screen's a keyboard or to the left, so I have to step over here to conduct everything. So sorry about that.
Got it. Okay. We'll just pretend you're...
Well, somebody asked me if I could move the computer, and I can't the way it's set up here. I don't have any space to do that, so.
Okay. So, Bob, your stuff is scheduled at 10:20.
Okay.
We do try to kind of stay on schedule in case people want to dial in for anything specific. Okay. So between now and then, if you want to just mute and turn off your camera, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, I guess that's 10:20 your time, so that's 12:20 my time. So okay, I'll do some parallel processing here because of just because everything is going on.
Yeah. No, don't worry. We'll I can reach out to you or JC. She's on as well.
Yeah. And John, you got the updated thing with the care confidential removed this morning, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I didn't want to put that up. That's
yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. I'll just kind of drop off to the background here. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
John, it looks like we have everyone but Heidi.
Okay.
Here.
Well, we can get started. Since it is 9:01 on my clock. So today's meeting we have some presentations and we have some updated recommendation language for consideration and also some updates on the process. So try to move some recommendations at some point forward to the commission for action. So I will do a roll call. That's the next item. And let's start with Committee Member Medrano.
I'm here.
Eric Patashner.
Here. Here.
And it would be Heidi Sanborn.
Here.
Okay. And Schneider.
Present.
And Sarah Toyota.
Here.
Next time I'll try to go in reverse order. So JC, your screen is on, and I'm not sure if you're muted. We're seeing your screen. Kate, do you want to do review public comments for items not on the agenda we received in?
Sure. We have one public comment received before the meeting from Gail Bryce of XT Green. regarding
Which is
carpet.
actually, it's actually for one of the agenda items, right?
Okay, you want me to keep that? Yes. Okay, I will read that the appropriate
Oh, we
agenda
can,
items.
yeah, once you read it now, but just know
Okay.
that
Perfect.
applies to one of the items.
It's regarding carpet preliminary draft recommendations. The following comments are submitted as a representative of XT Green, not as a member of the California Carpet Stewardship Advisory Committee. XT Green thanks the Market Development Committee for its thoughtful carpet preliminary draft recommendations. We also appreciate CARE's detailed responses and look forward to their presentation during today's meeting. With this additional information, XT Green plans to submit more specific comments later this week that will hopefully be helpful towards finalizing the committee's carpet recommendations. And that has been published. No other comments.
Okay. So that one is in the public comment portal. We have meeting notes from November 2nd. So I would ask if anybody has any modifications to those notes, please offer them up now. And if not, we can simply accept the notes as submitted if there are no changes. So we'll just keep moving, and we're 15 minutes ahead for discussion of recommendations. So there were quite a few tasks coming off the last meeting, and I think we've made progress on the recommendations. And why don't we start with Sarah? If she was asked to look into some of the construction and demolition material, we're going to have a presentation later on today. So, Sarah, why don't you update us on what's happened since our last meeting?
Well, I think one of the better breakthroughs I had was that there's already a pretty well established, let me find it really quick, C&D recycling certification protocol, and it's from the Recycling Certification Institute, and basically it's a weight-based kind of certification for processing facilities. And what I like about it is it has a pretty good background as far as when it was developed, having a lot of input with a lot of different portions of the industry. It's been out there for a while. It's actually been used. It has a protocol to have it done. It has cost. It has a lot of things that I think might be really great when it comes to verifying the C&D material. And it covers quite a bit of it as well. But it's broad enough that it's made for C&D recycling processing facilities, but it could be, I think, useful for, say, like a minimum take-back program, because it doesn't necessarily cover the flooring portion that we've been talking about as well, because they take back their own process. So they're not like or they take back their own material and process it at their facilities. But it's a protocol that could be adapted to that as well. So that, I think, was one of the things that I was kind of happy to find, because I felt like it gives us kind of a leg up. And at some point, I'd like to bring it. I'll put it. I have not put it in our folder yet in the Google Drive, but I'll put it there for everyone to look at. And then what I'd really like to do is take this and a few other recommendations that I've heard from some of the other folks that I've talked to, and maybe bring that back formally to the commission at the next meeting. But John, I'd like to work with you with the language and putting that together. And so I'd like to know if you think you'll have time to kind of work with me on that, to be able to do that.
Yeah, sure. And I did some follow-up specifically around drywall after our last discussion. So, and learned there's actually up in the Northwest, there's drywall manufacturers who have as much as 24% recycled content in drywall, because drywall is banned from disposal. So it's
yeah. And there's a couple other things too that I think that I've heard would be worth might be worth looking at minimum content. So I think the next step really would be to kind of write it out and then get it out there so that the public can look at it and those anyone can have a clear idea of what we might ask for and start giving us feedback and start talking about specific recommendations here at the commission. So I feel like that would be the next step for all of that.
Great. And then there was also the discussion of Office of Planning and Research. We got some feedback. Kara Morgan provided some feedback on language changes from the last update to general plan guidelines. But we did not follow up with Kara, did we, Sarah?
No, we didn't.
I think you and I were going to, you and I were going to follow up. So we need to, let's table that for the weeks in between these meetings go very quickly. So, let's make that a priority. I was going to be looking into air quality recommendations, but GHG recommendations with Calvert Cycle, and I was not able to do that. I was going to talk to Clark Williams, and just haven't followed up with that. However, Heidi Sanborn and I had a very good discussion with GoBiz. And Heidi, do you want to summarize?
Well, I've got my printer going. You might want to go ahead. It's a little loud here.
I don't know his title at GoBiz.
Kinda. He let me see his exact title. I'll have to go back and look, but he's basically the guy in charge of the. Yeah, go ahead. Senior advisor to business development and international trade. So he's the guy who actually, helps businesses when they come and say we want a site in California. He's the guy that says, okay, here's how we're going to do it. Here's your point person from GoBiz. This is what we need from you. Here's your site selection worksheet we need you to fill out so we can start working with you and figure out how to, where to send this worksheet, where should you probably be best located and why. And they make all the connections with the treasurer's office, whoever it is, Calvert Cycle, et cetera. So he really is at the tip of the spear on GoBiz for working directly with businesses and figuring out how they get permits and get on the ground and up and running.
And we did provide him with a copy of the language from the consolidated permit process during our discussion. So we probably need to circle back with him as well as Cal EPA to try to get some definitive reaction to the process. However, that process is already on the books. It's already legislated. So I think we had a really good discussion about the committee's recommendations around GoBiz. So maybe we make one more go around trying to tie GoBiz and the consolidated permit process together. But I think our recommendations seem to fit along the lines of what the current GoBiz thinking is, and including trying to have a specific kind of an embedded presence from Calvert Cycle in the GoBiz activities, and which would be really useful for local government people who want to have a specific point of contact. So Manuel and I were able to follow up on Friday around discussions with Matt Hennigan at Calvert Cycle to talk about the Calvert Cycle RMDZ recommendations, but it was informed, I think, by our discussion with GoBiz, and they're thinking about trying to pull this together in a more structured way rather than kind of ad hoc way that it now is. So we're pretty close, I think, on that consolidated permit approach and also the GoBiz language. Manuel, do you want to characterize our discussion with Matt?
Yes, very, very positive, very good conversation. He did mention that he recommended that we do have some action-driven recommendations on there. So it was great to hear what his thoughts were on this. So it seems like it's going to be to be continued kind of conversation as we move along. So I'm glad to have that opportunity to share with him.
Yeah, and Manuel's right that, you know, he was looking, a lot of our kind of bulleted recommendations were kind of passive, and he was looking for something that was more action-based. So yesterday, I took our preliminary draft recommendations and put them into a narrative form and tried to capture, I think, some of the emphasis that came out of that conversation with Matt. And I think once we get through the updates, maybe we go back and take a look at that. Manuel took our notes, more of the bulleted items on the loan program recommendations and updated those as well. So we'll take a hard look at those after we get caught up here. I did look at and found in the Public Resources Code the language on minimum content for glass that's manufactured in California. I think the recommendation would be that glass food and beverage containers sold in California should also have minimum content requirements. Right now, it's limited to glass food and beverage containers that are manufactured in California, and I think it's worth maybe recommending a legislative fix to possibly apply the same standards of containers sold that are now applied to plastic beverage containers. So we can take a look at modifying the language around that. And Schneider, you were going to look at a couple things. One was on standardizing bottles for reuse. I wonder if you had a chance to delve into that.
Actually completely slipped my mind, but I will, I'm putting it right here and I will do it right after this call.
Okay. And then you were going to reach out to the labeling media committee chair.
I did do that and I haven't heard back. So
Okay.
I'm wondering, Heidi, or Commissioner Sanborn, I'm sorry. I know that you had done some recent trips or work up in British Columbia. Any good contacts up there you might want to suggest for me?
That's done. Yeah. We'll talk offline.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you them. And
Okay.
John, I have my hand up. I strongly support your idea about applying the recycled content standards from the bill on packaging to other forms of glass. I see no reason why. And it should really, you know, we talk about this in the EPR world all the time. It's not where something's made, it's where it's sold. And if it's sold in California, it needs to meet those standards because they want to sell here and we're the big market. So I support that.
Yeah, the one thought that occurred to me as someone who enjoys French and Italian wine more than occasionally would be that impact. I'm not sure that we could even apply it to imported, although a lot of the containers that are filled in California, I've heard a number of them are manufactured in Mexico. So that would be an interesting discussion. But perhaps the French wine industry is far ahead of us on recycled content anyway.
Well, that also increases our impact worldwide, that there be markets everywhere and that recycled content is valued everywhere. I think the EU would be relieved to have us help them push the bar up a little bit.
They may already be far ahead of us. So we'll find out. But okay. Yeah, sorry, I was looking at the document and missed the chat. So I will we'll go back and focus. Okay, I think that was the extent. I did send to Eric Patashner a copy of the document that Howard Levinson referred to in comments to us at our last meeting, and I have not had a chance to go through it, but I think there were references there to federal Clean Air Act issues that might be addressed, and that's what Howard was pointing out. So we do have a copy of the document.
There is, and there's a lot of information in there around issues that we've talked about in the past around VOC offset credits and in sort of the dearth of availability in certain parts of the state that are going to need infrastructure. Issues around how you can bring in the positive air quality impacts that composting does bring when you take it out of the landfill, and how we can create some sort of credit system to also offset those VOC credits. Anyway, it's a good read if folks have time to look at it. But there's definitely things in there that we should be looking at deeper.
So we've made kind of a split on organics facilities because the issues like VOC offsets are very specific to organics facilities. And I think the focus of this committee has been on the broader, like the consolidated permit process that would apply to any project as opposed to an issue specific to organic projects. And, it doesn't mean that we couldn't weigh in, but when it gets to the commission, it's going to be in front of us all anyway. But just to remind everybody that Eric's committee on organics is focused on market development issues specific to their industry.
In my last committee meeting, John, the individual members that are responsible for the infrastructure proposal or coming up with the first one, that's Commissioner Usagware and Commissioner Kafikoff, so that they've been in discussions with you or trying to have that conversation first before they present something back to my committee.
Yeah, Alex Usagware contacted me, and we did. And I told him similar along the lines that I just did. We're kind of focused on the broader topics, but would be glad if we can be helpful at any point. Just give us a call and or bring it to this committee. You're the link anyway, Eric. Do you know when they're going to be talking about that? When it's going to come to your committee?
They indicated at the last committee, which I thought it would be up at the next subcommittee meeting, which is in about a week and a half or so, we will have something to sort of push forward to the full commission on this issue.
Okay. All right. So that's I think kind of our update on progress. But I wanted to suggest that we take a look at the updated loan items that Manuel worked on, and then the kind of revised Cal Recycle specific market development items. So, Kate, I think you have copies of those. Why don't we start with the loan?
Is this the right document, Chair Davis?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Manuel, you want to walk us through this? You're muted, Manuel. I think Manuel's working on his phone, so he's got a different path today. Manuel, we're not hearing you.
Yeah, I just switched to my laptop from my phone. I was able to do it.
Oh, okay. Good.
So.
All right.
So this is again the results of speaking with and having a chat with Matt Hennigan on Friday to make it a lot more action driven. So first, it was recommended that we actually call for an evaluation of the current policy and procedures of the RMBZ program. So on here, you'll see that we broke that bullet point into those four different sections that will hopefully achieve the following results after we evaluate the loan. And it's the first one, it's to be able to accept or process a loan within 30 days. And that is, as we saw in the presentation, a lot of the times, CarreCycle staff mentioned that a lot of the times the participants or the loan applicants are not, usually don't submit the full complete application. So it's important to mention that it's actually called a complete application. It's somehow verify that before it's officially turned in, so it doesn't get lost in the evaluation process, just to come back to the applicant with the need for a couple of documents or a couple of pieces of information that are still needed. So that part could streamline the whole process, so it wouldn't be accepted as complete until it's okayed by CarreCycle staff. B, refer potential projects immediately to loan staff. That's something that us zone administrators sometimes struggle with, where applicants or interested parties are somewhat in a nebulous area where they independently called or outreach to CarreCycle. So this is important to be able to quickly act on those type of inquiries. So sometimes we hear it from our local enforcement, not local enforcement, but the local assistance staff from CarreCycle sometimes. So from other agencies. So this way you'll streamline that process. So create an online loan application form. This is something, according to what we've been told, will be an easy fix, something that the CarreCycle IT folks have been engaged on. So this should be an easy one to be able to get going. But it was still said that if it's mentioned on this recommendation, that it will probably create that energy needed to streamline this process itself. Other agencies are already using this, so it wouldn't be too hard if they just have to replicate whatever application, whatever system they're using already. And then the reduction in the loan interest rate. If John, you could provide some historical on this. At one point, the rate was considered to be lowered. 4% is a great rate, but if we could even lower that, it'll make it even more attractive for applicants.
Yeah, the loan rate was actually set at the state municipal investment fund rate for a long time, which is closer to, I think, 1.25%. And now it's more tied to the prime, the area of prime rate, so it's 4%. How do you have your?
I really highly support these recommendations, but I do think that currently 4% is not a great rate, actually. I think with the interest rates where they are and the economy as unstable as it's been, if we really want these businesses here, to me, I think we ought to consider suggesting that they consider zero interest with the forgiveness if they pay until for like maybe the first year or two. And then if they can pay the whole thing off very quickly, within, I don't know, year 2, 3, whatever, then they don't have to pay any interest. And then otherwise after that, because that's a real incentive. I've heard over and over and over again that this program is really not that big of a deal. They can get a better deal at a bank that moves a lot faster with a lot less strings. So I guess if we really want this program to accelerate, I really suggest maybe we get more specific than just reducing the loan interest rate, which could be 0.25%. I don't think that's going to make a big difference. If we want to maybe make a bigger, broader recommendation that's a little more specific, I'd be supportive of that. Like at least, consider doing zero interest for at least the first year, and maybe zero interest if they have a certain payoff period, that's early. Anyway, just a suggestion.
Yeah, the great suggestion. That's somewhat the goal here, to bring it down to as low as possible. And zero interest will be great. There is no repayment penalty, so that could stay. But then also we were on the next bullet, they're performing a comprehensive loan review because we want to make sure that this loan program has enough funding for as long as we can. We heard that perhaps some of the funding might be going away in a few years, or at least be reduced. So we want to make sure that that is done. Can we scroll up a little bit? Oh yeah, that's fine. Never mind. So yeah, we could add that the actual, the target is 0%, unless anybody else has any issues with that from this committee. I think it would be fine to have that target. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, the review to make sure that we have funding, secured funding for throughout throughout, at least more than or at least for the time that this the new bill that gave 10 more years to life to this program, to at least have that for at least the next 10 years, the funding.
So, well, Sarah Tread has
yeah.
Thank you. Just going back to what Heidi just brought up, I think it might be good to add also, at a minimum, it needs to be competitive with a bank interest. Maybe they can. 0 is a great target, but I think that the wording to add that you need to be better than the banks if you're going to make this worthwhile. So something like competitive, more competitive with, create an interest rate that is competitive with bank interest rates at a minimum.
Or create incentives, using the interest rate to create an incentive.
Sure.
Okay. And my experience assisting potential programs is that the 4% is an attractive rate compared to higher than that, upwards of 8, sometimes 8%, even up to 10%. So at 4%, it is attractive. It's not the best, but if we could go to a 0%, that'll make it even more attractive, and it would look like much more of an incentive. So okay.
It's also a fixed rate. I think the loan staff has made that comment at times, and so it's where a lot of the bank loans are floating rates. So having that assurance of a fixed rate is important. But again, what's the effective rate is the issue.
Yeah. And then on the issuing iBank bond secure loan repayment to increase the amount there for the loans available. I'm not too familiar with iBank. If John, you want to provide a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, I can. This actually was something that Mike Peparian recalled in the conversation I had with him recently. So Mike Peparian was a member of the Integrated Waste Management Board for a number of years, and then went to work in the Treasurer's office. And but while he was on the Integrated Waste Management Board, there were issues about the loan fund having enough money to meet demand. If you recall the presentation we had from CalRecycle a few meetings ago, they were averaging about $10 million a year in loans. It's now down closer to 4. And so the fund was constantly on the brink of running out of money. In fact, 1 year it ran out. So the issue is, do you sell the loan portfolio on the secondary market, take a discount, or are there other ways to replenish the money short of just pulling cash out of the Integrated Waste Management Fund? So issuing a bond secured by loan repayments was given a hard look. So actually the loan portfolio has been pretty strong over time, and so there would be a slight discount. But if they had, say, $10 million of outstanding loans, they might be able to issue bonds for $9.5 million or $9 3/4. So and then again, when those funds are loaned out, you could just roll over and issue another bond. It seemed to be more expeditious than selling on the secondary market, selling the portfolio or selective aspects of the portfolio. So it was a way to create a kind of a rolling fund. Even though there was some discounting, you'd have more money available. Of course, when you're loaning less than what's in the fund on an annual basis, then it's kind of a non-issue. But if we're trying to increase the demand like it was 10 years ago, then being able to roll money back into the fund becomes important. So this seemed to be a good approach, but I think it ran out of steam as demand began to drop on the loan funds. So we put that back in as something to look at.
Yeah. So, and then the following bullet there. So giving priority to materials and then per their financing needs. As an example, we could cite that there's a lot of the fiber that's leaving California, and when there's available technologies and available potential projects that would be coming to California. So in that case, there could be given a bit of a priority for those projects that are addressing that need, that deficit. So in the case, we heard a presentation from a paper pulper here that's from Utah that it's willing to open up in California, and there's plenty of material for them to process. But that's just a drop in the bucket of the amount of material that's leaving the ports to out of the state. So giving priority to those type of projects would help address this. That's an interesting one. Any feedback from the commissioners on this?
I mean, if I remember the presentation from the Paper Manufacturers Association, they actually said access to capital, if I remember correctly, the issue for them wasn't so much access to capital, it was the regulatory environment in California, specifically cap and trade, made the business model for pulping or actual paper recycling in the state untenable. Do we want to, I don't think we know enough really to provide a policy recommendation on that issue, but should we highlight the fact that that is something that needs to be looked at?
I think so.
I think that was the AFPA talking about expanding existing mills. I think that's where the cap and trade issue came up. But, this one, there's another issue around.
Traditionally, Black people have been shut out of the financial system. My grandfather found
it gives priority over, one project over another, which is, could be problematical as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few other people who want to speak. So I think Heidi, you were up first, and then Ann.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I really support this idea that there's a priority on funding. If our goal is to achieve greenhouse gas reductions and create markets in California, then these need to be prioritized. The question is in what order based on the material type and the throughput, really, because if it's a small facility and throughput when we need a really big one, or, there's a lot of variables there. So I think we just make a general comment that, in general, we believe the state needs to develop maybe a checklist of things they're looking at to make certain projects a priority, to fast track them and give them the money first to get them going. And we're open to how they do that. We're, again, just a volunteer commission trying to give general concepts. So if we just list the problem that we see and suggested direction to go in to solve it, let them hammer it all out and figure out the details. But I agree with Eric, we shouldn't get too specific, but let the people with the resources and the time actually figure out the exact way it would be implemented. But I do think that they need to be prioritized. Mm-hmm. I think that would be very helpful.
And
thank you. I actually haven't read the cap and trade information in years, and I wonder if our recommendation should look at cap and trade and see where the money is being allocated. Full disclosure, my city or a developer in my city has received a lovely cap and trade grant for building affordable housing at a transit stop. So yay for that, but shouldn't our recycling-based businesses, first of all, get fast-tracked? But I'm not sure if the program would even recognize that having a paper pulping mill in California where we're not outsourcing is actually pretty critical. And I'm happy to be educated. I'll just add this to my reading list.
Yeah. I mean, I think you raised a number of issues. There's financing that's available from cap and trade auction. I've heard it characterized as the annual food fight at the legislature for which projects receive funding. We have seen organics projects and recycling projects funded with that money, also food recovery. And I think the reuse money most recently came out of cap and trade allocation. But that depends also on revenue, and cap and trade revenues are down along with the rest of the economy. So, and it's not a secure funding source. I think the issue about that committee member Tashner brought up has to do with kind of the existing industry sites that are regulated under the emissions protocols. So they must secure offsets in order to continue operating at their current levels or using their current fuels. And so that becomes difficult, it becomes expensive, and apparently at least one paper mill in California shut down rather than try to acquire those offsets. But so, that's a kind of a different issue where there's actually direct emissions, and trying to justify those direct emissions. There might be a way to do it by looking at the emission reductions associated with the activity. So a paper recycling operation reduces emissions globally, but then emits within the boundaries of the state. And since emissions generally are geographically based in inventories, that's the hang-up. So yeah, it's possible to untangle that. Some states like Oregon and Washington, I think, have done consumption-based emission studies where they look at the emissions associated with the overall economy and not just what occurs within the state. California hasn't done that. So it would, in order to work around the existing cap and trade regulatory system, have to overhaul the whole system. It'd be a big push. I think there's some ways, maybe you'll see some recommendations later on that kind of touch on the importance of GHG emissions from our activities, but trying to slot industry outside the cap and trade system because of the nature of their activity would be
I'm trying to channel Commissioner Dell saying, wouldn't it just be a mass balance analysis?
It would if our view of greenhouse gas emissions was global, but California's emission inventory is specific to activities occurring within the state, whether it's motor vehicles or electrical generation. So, yeah, I mean, we could raise the concern, about that balance, but it's hard to slot it in California structure.
But it goes back to if we really identify essential businesses, then maybe that will help us kickstart some of those recycling-based manufacturers if we can bump them up onto essential business list.
Yeah. Okay.
The next,
so we can take a look. I'm going to have some further discussion around the GHG program, so that's on my task. So.
The next is at the request of this committee on offering microloans. Those numbers, the range that you see there is based on a microloan program that is available here in Southern California. Although as of recent, they have bumped up that amount to almost 100,000, but that's around looking at other microloan programs throughout the state. That's around the amounts that are offered from 5,000 up to $75,000 or even up to $100,000. So for the smaller type of businesses, for reuse and repair type of businesses that might not need that much input or that much input in funding, that seems to be the right amount. So is that amount seem optimal for the rest of the group?
So these would be for small businesses.
For smaller, yeah. Sounds good. Okay. Yeah. And it's based on other programs. So, and then also on this, John and I will be presenting to a group of zone administrators for the RMDZ program later this week on some of these recommendations that are public already to get some of their input. These are the feet on the street, the folks that are speaking with future programs and business developers that are manufacturing items or could be manufactured items from recycled content materials. So getting their input will be really important on some of these recommendations. We might come back with a few more. So I guess stay tuned for that one. So is there anything else? I don't recall. If we could scroll down.
Yeah, I think that's it.
That's it? Yeah.
Yeah, so as Manuel said, he and I will be presenting at what's called Zone Works. It's the kind of semi-annual meeting with Coward Cycle staff and zone administrators. So why don't we quickly look? We've got a few minutes, about 5 minutes, to take a quick look at the Coward Cycle draft recommendations. So again, these are based on what we developed, this committee developed, and although we had discussion with Matt Henningen about it, it helped us, I think, to focus our recommendations. So, and we'll be carrying those recommendations forward to talk with the zone administrators about it, or at least initiate that discussion with zone administrators and also Coward Cycle staff who works on market development issues. So I think the key focus on the Coward Cycle market development was to create a market development section. There's lots of different language in the Coward Cycle organizational chart, but sections seem to be appropriate. Staff with business development, fiscal, and economic analysis expertise to identify and recruit new industries. So right now, as the next paragraph alludes to, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise around technologies, permitting, finance, research, local assistance, but it's spread throughout the agencies. And because it's diffused, there's no one really focused specifically on the broad market development issues and opportunities. So we think from a market development perspective, a new market development section would create a framework to identify gaps in statewide recycling, organics, reuse, and repair infrastructure, and prepare strategies with the stakeholders. So alluding to the language about prioritizing loan money, where is that priority and how is that determined if there was sufficient money to actually prioritize? So again, there was at one time a market development staff dedicated specifically to market development work, and so they brought that focus and that energy, and then this goes on to talk about some of those specific activities. Again, these are all items that we identified earlier. They're just wrapped into a more of an action-oriented narrative. So there's what I'm calling specific or traditional economic development approaches, and then industry specific. So there's a paragraph here about paper and the 8 million tons of paper fibers that are exported from California annually, as opposed to paper pulping domestically, paper pulping in California. So how do we, how can we do that? What's the market development aspect needed to do that? The size of the mill in Utah would handle about 325,000 tons a year. of paper. There's 8 million leaving California. So there's anywhere, above 20 facilities like that needed to handle the material we have available in the state. And where's our focus to do that? The next few bullets or the next few paragraphs talk about more traditional approaches to expand existing businesses. Most economic development professionals know that you work with your existing economy first. Trying to attract new businesses is always a home run, but it's the existing ones and growing those existing ones that are most successful. And there are tools to mine databases, identify manufacturers, and then work with them to convert to recycled feedstock. There's a lot of companies manufacturing products using plastic and using virgin plastic that could just as well use good sources of recycled plastic to make those products. So, but who are they? Where are they? And who is interested in improving the sustainability? And how do you reach those people? That's a task. That's an ongoing task. And then we mentioned here the reuse and repair businesses, statewide source reduction, enhancing by responding to their needs. CalRecycle just issued requests for project proposals for reuse and was way oversubscribed, 5 or 6 times the number of applicants compared to the amount of money that was available. So what are those people asking for? What do they need? And I think possibly we could agendize a presentation for a future meeting to talk about that specific for use RFP and find out where the interest was and where the market development opportunities are. And then the last set of recommendations, or the next last, two-way communication. That economic development is local. The state can be very helpful, but can be if we can work together and not try to come up with one kind of unified approach, but be responsive to local needs, it's going to be far better than a top-down approach. And one way to do that is to track and share market information, including pricing, in-use destinations, contamination limits, market trends, and opportunities. The people who are active in markets moving material, are on top of that, but the others who are affected by it don't always have that information. The Northeast Recycling Coalition and I think to an extent the Southeast Coalition are state multi-state efforts that do share that kind of information amongst all the affected parties, everybody involved in recycling. It helps make informed decisions and set directions. And then lastly, talk about the RMDZ administrators, because we've been focused on trying to work through CalRecycle on projects. We know that CalRecycle works with GoBiz. CalRecycle receives loan applications, works on financing. We're not always in the loop on that. And there are examples of projects that have gone to zone administrators ready to be funded that the zone administrator knew nothing about and that have problems with the project. So, we need to avoid that by working more closely. The last one kind of cues up a presentation that we'll have discussion with Nick Lapis shortly on our agenda, and that's to try to find that sustainable funding source. Talk about the RMDZ Loan Fund was created by infusion from the Integrated Waste Management Fund. There was a $10 million annual amount that went into the RMDZ Loan Fund and built up the fund in the early years, and then that was eliminated as the demand on the fund, the Integrated Waste Management Fund, increased. The Integrated Waste Management Fund is $1.40 for every ton disposed in California. That amount was set 25 years ago. It hasn't changed. The Consumer Price Index for California has increased 82.5% in the meantime. So if that $1.40 were just indexed to the Consumer Price Index, it would be $2.55 today. So it's basically lost 82.5% of its value over the last 25 years. And that 255 would bring in an additional $47 million into the program. So there's a paragraph here about the benefit from our activities in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but all those benefits are lost when materials are disposed instead of recycled or composted or reused, repaired. And so if we're going to get those emission reductions, the equity suggests that it be done by letting people who are wasting material pay for those reductions. So anyway, that cues up the discussion later on. I want to go through this. Obviously, we're not going to have time to discuss it because we have presentations scheduled. But let's maybe at our next meeting, I'd like to combine this with the loan recommendations that we just went through and see if we can move this forward. So just a reminder, this did come from the committee, from our deliberations and our discussions from our very first meeting. So let's get back to it. But we've got presentations scheduled. Manuel has, and we will talk. Manuel and I will talk about this on Thursday at Zone Works. So.
I just wanted to reiterate and correct myself a statement I made earlier about working with CalRecycle staff on this. I want to make sure it's clear that all these were developed here at this committee, all these proposals by the subcommittees and by this group of commissioners. And at no point was the intention to have CalRecycle staff influences in any of these. We just consulted as a way to make sure that some of the feasibility of some of these recommendations. So if I made this statement earlier, that sounded like they were more involved than they should have been. It's not the case. It was just simply as a consultation and to make sure that some of these items were not too far-fetched from what could be done. So.
I think all of our meetings with the agencies have been to try to gain clarity around the recommendations. So we have a presentation scheduled on CalGreen, the C&D program. Kate, are we ready to go forward with that?
Yes, I'm giving the presenter controls to Gregory Dick, who will be making the presentation. Greg, let me know if you have any issues on that. There we go. We see it. It's a little, it kind of captures half of the screen, Greg. Weirdly.
Let me see if I can work this out here for you. Are you getting? I'm not seeing what you guys are seeing, so I'm not.
We're seeing the PowerPoint screen, so like I can see your slide deck. It's not full screen, but we can see the.
Can you see this? Can you see the slide? The whole thing?
Yeah, we can see the slide. I will be, to those watch. Greg did a great job, and most of this text is really pretty large. So yeah, if you zoom in a little bit on that, that would probably be helpful. And this will be posted up on our public notice. I will make this. I will try to get that.
What happens on the slide view? Do we lose is that where we lost it?
Sorry. When we do it full screen, it seems to capture like half of it. So this might be as good as it gets for right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That looks good.
All right.
That looks good for all you commissioners. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm Greg Dick. I appreciate the opportunity to present some information on CalGreen to the committee. I am a technical senior within the Statewide Technical and Analytical Resources branch in the MMLAD division. I've been working on green building and construction demolition waste for about 18 years, and I have been involved in the CalGreen development representing CalRecycle since the beginning. About 13, 14 years now. So when we talk about CalGreen, it's the California Green Building Standards Code. It's the first in the nation's mandatory green building standards code. All building code appears under CCR Title 24, and CalGreen is Part 11. It was first adopted in 2007, and it was originally voluntary, and I think it's been mandatory since 2009, maybe 2010, so I couldn't quite remember that one. It's been a blur. The code is laid out with various sections, administration, scope, definitions. What we're generally talking about here are sections 4 and 5. Those deal with the mandatory measures for residential and non-residential construction. There's also an appendix, A4 and A5, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. Each of those sections 4 and 5 generally contain 5 divisions, so they'll deal with planning, energy use, water use, materials and resource conservation, and environmental quality. Just for future reference, I have a link to the code text here for anybody who wants to review it later. CalGreen is an interesting one because the Building Standards Commission is the agency that adopts building code, but there are various other state agencies who have the authority to actually write the code. So there are 4 state agencies with that authority in CalGreen. Department of Housing and Community Development, they have authority for all residential, which is single multifamily, hotels, shelters, talking low-rise residential, high-rise residential, and that all appears in Section 4. The other 3 agencies are all going to be in Section 5, which are the non-residential sections, but they're a little different. So the Division of State Architect, they have the authority for public schools, which is K through 14, community colleges included. They write the code for that, but they typically follow the code written by Building Standards Commission, but they don't necessarily adopt everything that the other non-residential agencies adopt. OSHPOD, they deal with the hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, etc. They rarely adopt much code because of the specialty of their facilities. But the bulk of the code is written by Building Standards Commission staff, so they have authority for non-covered occupancies. So that's any occupancy not without any of the other agencies have authority of. Other state agencies such as Cal Recycle, Air Resources Board, Energy Commission, they can suggest language to the various code writing authorities, and we work closely with them, and we've had a good relationship with HCD and DSA and BSC over the years. Like I said, I've been with them doing this for like 13, 14 years now. CalGreen is triennially updated. That's for the major updates. So the most recent version, 2019, has an effective date of January 1, 2020. During the 18 months in between, they have the intervening code cycle where they will use to clarify, update, like with, say, statute changes, and they need to conform to new statute, or like they had to do during the drought, issue emergency regulations. They've just recently completed the most recent intervening code cycle, and those supplemental changes will have an effective date of July 1, 2021. The next CalGreen update will be for 2022, which will have an effective date of January 1, 23. So as we're starting to get into the next code adoption cycle, there's many steps. The first step will be the pre-cycle activities, and that's going to be starting within the next month or two and probably run through winter, maybe into spring. And that'll include focus groups from the various code writing agencies. They'll get interested parties, state agencies into a room, and they'll do informal meetings. So that'll be a chance for Cal Recycle, if we have any thoughts on changes, we can submit those ideas. or it's members of the public or industry or any of the interested parties. Once the code writing agencies kind of have an idea of what those changes are going to look like, they will put the amendments forward to the Code Advisory Committee for review. And the CACs only can review information that's being proposed. They can't look back at existing language unless there's a change being proposed to it. The next CAC for green building should happen sometime spring, summer 2021. Once the Code Advisory Committee reviews all the language and it either says, they approve, or they think maybe it's good but needs to be tweaked a little bit, or just says, no, this isn't really what we think should be happening, the agencies with authority can either accept the recommendations or not, and more than likely they're going to go with whatever the CAC recommends. Once the language is kind of formalized into a draft, it'll be released. It'll go through the formal comment period with 45-day comments and then 15-day comment periods if needed. And once all the comments have been gone through, the full Building Standards Commission would meet for an open meeting and consider adopting all the proposed languages. Publication of this code would be planned for about July 1, 2022, because it's usually 6 months prior to the effective date. That gives all the interested parties a chance to know what's going on. And like I said, the effective date of the next code cycle should be about January 1, 2023. So when we're talking about CalGreen and the scope, what we're generally talking about is new construction. So anything that's being built that requires a building permit. That also includes additions and alterations of existing buildings. So for residential, that's whenever the addition or alteration increases the building's conditioned area, volume, or size. And when we're talking about non-residential, many sections of the mandatory code only apply when certain permit values or additions size limits are met. What we've done for like the C&D section is we added language in 301.3.2 that said whenever a permit is required for work, the waste management section should be complied with. What CalGreen does not apply to are activities covered by demolition permits. So when we're talking about the C&D diversion, those are found in sections 4408 and 5408. And for new construction and most additions and alterations, it's 65% of the total diversion. So like I said before, for the residential, there's the limits on when the code is enforceable. So there are 3 methods to compliance. One is develop a waste management plan, identify your materials, identify facilities, show weight tickets to show that you've met and sent the materials to the intended places to calculate a 65% diversion rate. The second way is to utilize a waste management company that can provide verifiable documentation that it meets an overall 65% waste diversion for C&D. One of the drawbacks to this is if a facility is taking a lot of heavy materials, a lot of concrete, that may up their overall diversion rate, while most new construction doesn't favor that type of material. There's not a lot of concrete going related to new construction. The third method would be the disposal reduction alternative, and this is one that kind of helps kind of factor in source reduction as well as the others. So basically, you take the project size, and it's a factor of the square footage. So if the overall disposal is less than 2 pounds per square foot for non-residential and residential high-rise, you would meet your 65% rate. So for low-rise, it would be less than 3.4 pounds per square feet. Like I said, this was kind of a lot of these ways were done just to simplify and streamline the process, because you've got projects happening all over the state, and we're trying to make sure that industry was going to be able to go along and be able to do this and not be an overly burdensome process. We tried to make it different ways to do it. There are exceptions in the requirements. So, for instance, excavated soil and land clearing debris is not included in the diversion calculation, although for non-residential occupancies, they have adopted a 100% diversion rate for those materials. The other two are provided for some flexibility. So there's an alternate waste reduction method. So if a local enforcement agency realizes that a project just doesn't have the facilities to deal with the materials being generated, they can work with the project and develop some alternate either calculations, requirements. So it gives them the flexibility. The other one is for isolated job sites. So say you have a really rural project and there's just no facilities within the hauling boundaries. So that provides a lot of flexibility for like the rurals. There are a couple other related mandatory measures I thought you might be interested in. Those include recycling by occupants, which is providing space for adequate collection. So they have to have, for non-residential and multifamily with more than 5 units or 5 or more units, they need to have space for storage collection of recycling, including paper, cardboard, glass, plastics, organics, metals. Sorry. There's also language for universal waste specific to non-residential additions and alterations. Basically, they need to look at thermostats and other universal waste that might be involved and need to make sure those are managed properly. There's also a code reference in there for the MWELO, which is the Model Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinances, which local jurisdictions are required to adopt. And those are related is because they include measures on the use of compost and mulch. So, like I mentioned earlier, there are voluntary measures, and they appear in the appendix. So A4 and A5. These contain the tiers, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 is a slightly lower standard, or is higher than the mandatory. Tier 2 is higher than Tier 1. These can contain reach goals or may signal future mandatory measures that industry may want to be aware of or other users. They can be adopted locally as mandatory as well. So there are some jurisdictions out there, I want to say in Sonoma County, that have adopted, say, a Tier 1 as their mandatory, or certain measures within Tier 1 as their mandatory Cal Green building code. So in the Tier 1 and Tier 2 for C&D diversion, the original C&D mandatory was 50%. So when they bumped it up to 65% a couple cycles ago, there was concern about bumping up the tiers too far to meet. So the idea was that they would keep 65 and 75 for the residential, but add to that a third-party verified diversion. So as Commissioner Toyota referenced earlier, like the certification, Recycler Certification Institute's third-party certification would be something similar to that. So for non-residential, they've also adopted 65% with utilizing a diversion facility, or 80% with no third party. I know the committee has talked about interest in recycled content in the building code, and we do have some within the voluntary sections. It's the way that it's calculated is kind of complicated. So you have to kind of total the value of your recycled materials based on recycled content, and then you can compare that to the total value of materials. And if the overall is 10 or 15%, you could meet that goal. We recognized a couple cycles ago that may be that approach may be a little difficult, so we kind of stole an idea about going with some kind of a prescriptive approach. So we developed a chart with I think 9 material categories where we set minimum recycled content values. So if for tier 1, I think if you use two of those materials for 75% of their overall use in the project, or for tier 2, it would be 3 products, you would meet the requirements of those tiers. The tiers include, like, for instance, mulch and compost, recycled aggregate, ceiling panels, gypsum wallboard, carpet, exterior paint. So just to name, I think that's all of them. Fiberglass and cellulose insulation. Sorry. There's a couple other things I thought you might be interested in what we're doing around here. So the SB 1383 regulations were just, as you may be aware, the Office of Administrative Law just, I guess, finally approved them. So under Article 8 of those regulations, jurisdictions are to adopt a local ordinance or other enforcement mechanism for the waste reduction and space allocation sections of CalGreen, as well as the sections of WELO that deal with compost and mulch application. The regulations also includes annual reporting requirements. So I know you guys were looking for some data on CalGreen, but we really don't have any at this point. But under the 1383 regulations, jurisdictions are going to have to report the number of projects having met or proceeded under the CalGreen requirements. We've also got the Model C&D Ordinance, which was developed 15 years ago or so under I forget the act now, but so it was available for all jurisdictions that wanted to adopt, and it was a big deal. And then CalGreen came in, and a lot of jurisdictions have kind of defaulted to CalGreen, but with the 1383 regs, they've made sure that the Model C&D Ordinance has been updated to show that support for the 1383. The C&D Ordinance is also important because it does address demolition. It does address deconstruction. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of a picture for what CalGreen is, what it can do, what we're trying to do. I think there's definitely some room for us to look at maybe trying to see if we can figure out a way to make some of those recycled content pieces in the mandatory. But the hard part with that is that in order for you to require a use of a material in the building code, it has to be universally available and in quantities for any project. I think that's one of the limitations that we've seen, is that it has to be all over across the whole state. You have to be able to just walk into a store and get that, or the purveyor. So I think when you're talking about maybe mulch and compost and aggregate, those are likely available. I think some of the other materials like paint and carpet may not be but that's definitely something we can look at. Also, another thing we were talking about internally is how we can maybe look at the 65% waste diversion requirements and maybe disassociate it from the C&D, the heavy materials that are driving those rates at facilities. And I don't know if we necessarily have a model for that, but it's something we're talking about and are interested in. So I appreciate your time, and I'm here to answer as best I can.
Greg, thank you. We do have at least one comment, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for going forward. And Committee Member Toyota and I are going to be looking more extensively at issues around C&D materials. So I'm hoping you might be available to maybe chat with us and let us dive into some of the items that you raised here.
Absolutely.
So we'll reach out to you following. But Ann Schneider, you'd like to comment?
Thank you, and thank you for the nice overview. A couple of big picture questions, and then I'll relate it to how it actually happens down at the level. It's great that we emphasize recycling, and I would imagine on-site reuse. A lot of those inerts for a big project should have on-site reuse. I don't know if we can require that, but most of it's going to come back as base rock or fill, and I don't know if that's currently in Cal Green. I also don't know if Cal Green is looking at adaptive reuse in the same location or by relocation, because a lot of really good buildings are being torn down in the excuse for whatever, and we are losing, and I'm going to sound really hippie here, we're losing parts of our soul. For my city, we've got a lot of new money coming in, and they are tearing down close to 100-year-old homes. Where that hurts is I'm trying to designate neighborhoods as historic so that we have more power to fight the Federal Aviation Administration. Under NEPA, neighborhoods that are historic have more control for noise. So completely outside of the solid waste world, these issues become really important in dealing with transportation agencies and entities that get federal funding. So and in my olden days, I really did advocate for adaptive reuse in location or by relocation. And there's a whole set of other actions that have to go along to make these things happen. So my big picture question is, where is reuse in all of this? Reuse in its highest order, which is adaptive reuse. And to stop designing buildings that are meant to only last 30 years, like Silicon Valley concrete tilt-ups.
I think I appreciate the question, and I think we've struggled with that one as well. One of the things I want to look at is looking at the historic building code and maybe the existing building codes, and see if there's a way to at least address some of the deconstruction issues within those. I don't know if that's viable at this point, but it's definitely, I've got contacts with the agencies who write at least the historic building code, and I'm reaching out to them to try to at least start a dialogue on things that we might be able to do. I mean, there's a lot of historic materials, at least in those types of buildings. The problem is that Cal Green only addresses new construction. I think, the idea that maybe designing for longer is something that could potentially be looked at within Cal Green, but the demolition side is just, we'd kind of hoped early on when we were doing this that by signaling out, by saying, divert 65% of construction and demolition materials, that we would kind of be able to get through. But we've started hearing from jurisdictions that saying, no, that's a demolition permit that has no authority under Cal Green, and we can't require the 65% diversion for Cal Green for those demolition projects or anything like that. So you can definitely look at reuse in general for reusing structures, and I can't remember offhand what we had in there. So I can look at that.
Okay. I'm happy to be a resource for you, having been one of the early deconstruction people, and having projects that had been adaptively reused on some things. It's such a micro scale, though. But the really important thing is the additional benefits to a city by having historically designated neighborhoods in terms of overall environmental protection.
Thank you.
But the flip side is that people will come in and tear down an absolutely gorgeous house and say, well, I'm going to recycle 65% of it. Yay. That's just plain wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
and then it's personal property.
And sorry. I'm concerned that we're going to lose our time for our next
understand.
presentation.
Mr. Dick, I'm here to go into any level of detail you may like.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So we have Heidi and Manuel, and then we're going to move on to a carpet presentation. We'll come back with, I'm sure, with more on the C&D later.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring up the fact that as Commissioner Schneider was just reelected to our city council, that what city councils have been doing for 10 years is adopting ordinances that require deconstruction prior to landfilling and require 3 days for people to come and pick and pull. I actually, when I was in local assistance 20 years ago, we were doing that with City of Atherton and some of the other very well-off jurisdictions, because they were just scraping a plate and throwing everything in the landfill and destroying all those materials. I even have some of them in my house, including my hardwood floors, because I really believe in that model. But that's something that you could work on separately, and any community can do that. And in fact, that could be a recommendation of this committee, is that we look at making that a state law, that decommission, or there's some sort of incentives for cities that pass resolutions, or they get a checkbox with Cal Recycle on their annual reporting if they've adopted an ordinance that mandates that no home can just be simply destroyed mechanically and not salvage any materials, because that is where a lot of these valuable. I have Arroyo Craftsman, 8 of them, handmade bungalow lamps, sconces for my wall that I got for $240 for all 8 of them out of a house that was going to be bulldozed and thrown in a landfill in Palo Alto. And that's the kind of thing that just infuriates me, the waste. And sometimes, as you said, historic products. If you're trying to restore a home, those have high value to you. I've restored many homes with my husband, who's a broker. So anyway, those are things that we could all look at individually at the city level, but also giving some sort of creative incentives to jurisdictions to adopt and consider these kinds of ordinances across the state.
Chair Davis, sorry if I have to jump in. What that goes down to is reuse businesses, reuse building material businesses need a lot of space, and they're getting pressured out of, especially in areas like the Greater Bay Area. East Palo Alto had a used building material store, couldn't hang on to the space. So that is a market development issue to make sure that building reuse businesses are somehow saved.
Manuel, Medron.
Hi, Greg. Thank you very much for the information. I was just wondering if Cal Recycle has compiled any data on how many facilities we have throughout the state that process this material. Anything from reuse and repair all the way to C&D MRFs throughout the state, and to what capacity?
I don't have anything offhand, but I'm sure I can work with Kate and the KISS team and get you some data on the C&D facilities. The deconstruction firms, I don't know if they fall under the new recycling reporting requirements. So again, I'll touch base with Kate and see if we can get you something at a future date on that. I just want to touch on something just for what Commissioner Sanborn was saying, that just to highlight for everybody that we've been working for the last couple of years with it used to be known as the Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group. Now I think it's just the Deconstruction Work Group. So it's with Timothy Hood in Region 9, EPA Region 9, and many of the Bay Area jurisdictions and businesses have been working together, collaborating, trying to find solutions, and just want to make sure that you all were aware of their activities, and I'm sure your input and participation would be welcome with them as well.
So, Kate, we have public comment, and then we'll move on to our next item.
Yes, we have 2 comments, but one was about GHG emissions. I think I'll cover that for time's sake, maybe on the next agenda item. Gail Bryce's comment for this agenda item is for Mr. Dick. There is a shortage of carpet to recycle in California. Are there any ways you would suggest to change the Cal Green program to ensure the amount of carpet available to be recycled from demolition projects?
Again, that's a tough one because Cal Green doesn't apply to demolition. So The carpet being collected through CalGreen is typically going to be the tear-offs, the excess part of new construction. It's not going to be the removal of replacement carpet. So I don't know if I have a good answer to that question.
Well, you just queued up our next presentation. And,
thank you all for your time.
Greg, again, thank you, and we will reach out to you for follow-up, and I'm sure this will be back on the future agenda. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And we have Bob Peoples and J.C. Bolden from the Carpet America recovery effort. The committee members will recall that we've been looking and discussing some preliminary draft recommendations around the carpet program. We've had a number of comments, particularly around the availability of materials. So did share those recommendations to CARE and also to CalRecycle's Carpet Advisory Committee. The committee sent it out and asked for individual members to comment on our recommendations. And Kate read the one that we've received so far earlier. But Bob Peoples and JC, if you want to join us, and we're ready.
Bob, would you like me to give you presenter view? Do you have slides you'd like to share, or JC?
Yes, if you don't mind. I have
no
one
problem.
or two slides that we'll probably use during the discussion. And let's see, does it? I guess it tells
Something
me
should have
what I
popped
can
up on your screen.
Yeah, so I don't want to pop it up quite yet. I just want to make I'll just hit share when I'm ready.
Sure.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. John, thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. And also, going back to a conversation you and I had last week, I'm really not going to do a presentation per se. I wanted to be available to respond to questions on our responses to the recommendations or the draft recommendations of the commission. I think there's an awful lot of information that was presented in the CARE 2019 annual report and the quarterly updates that are published. Everybody is quite familiar with what's going on. I would like to highlight a couple quick points and then happy to try to answer questions. The first was that this program had a really good 2019, despite the fact that we didn't hit the 24% recycling rate at the end of the year that the statutory requirement claims is due by January 1st of 2020. We had every expectation of hitting that, but we ran into a couple buzzsaws, and I think the commission is actually describing some of those. Probably one of the biggest ones is permit delays. Los Angeles Fiber Company, which is the largest recycler of post-consumer carpet in the world today, and certainly the largest in California, suffered over a year's delay in expansion permits that were kind of, I don't know how you describe it, like staged out. Instead of saying, here are the 5 things we need at the start of the project, get these permits in, answer all these questions, and then there's another set of questions on another set of permits, and then another set of questions about other permits. So we lost basically a full year capacity from LA Fiber's expansion project at that point in time. I think everybody's familiar with what's gone on with PG&E and the problems that they've had. Well, that resulted in the failure of the Woodland facility to come online for, at this point in time, it's nominally a year and a half before they've finally been energized. So I know a lot of people have tried to assist with that process, but it's unimaginable to me that it could take that long to energize this plant, which cost us a pretty significant increase in new capacity that CARE had invested in both these projects for capacity growth within the state of California. We also had a tile processor, relatively small, but nonetheless a new tile processor, who, when they started up their operation, had some difficulties with the physical plant in terms of sizing of some of the equipment. That had to result in some rather lengthy negotiations, procurement of funding, and procurement of the equipment, installation, and then finally getting that line started up basically in December of last year. So we probably lost 6 months or so of tile recycling capacity as a result of that. And then we've supported, I think, all of these projects with grant money to one extent or the other, some of them quite dramatically. And unfortunately, there's another recycler in California that's been, carrying a grant from CARE for almost 5 years now, for which we've not had a pound of output produced. There have been a number of issues that they've had to deal with. It's an international source of funding for this operation. But at the end of the day, we're approaching 5 years with no capacity add there, with $250,000 of funding tied up. So I had tried to point out in the annual report that any one of those operations would have resulted in clearing the 24% hurdle. And we were on a good trajectory going into 2020 until everybody knows what happened. So I do want to share this graph, which is can you see the graph of recycling rate over time?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So you could just see that since 2015, we have been on a steady increase in terms of the recycling output, which translates into our recycling rate. And we've done that through a variety of activities, not the least of which is over $9 million of grants that have been provided to recyclers. The vast majority of those funds are awarded within the state of California, but we recognize that as we grow the recycling rate, we can't grow California fast enough to consume the material that we're trying to grow. So we do support people outside of the state of California, both with subsidy payments and with grant dollars. Like I said, we have a target of at least 75% of those grant funds staying in the state of California. And in the future, the expectation is that all the grant funds will stay in California as the capacity comes online and the state has the ability to absorb its own post-consumer carpet flow. I want to address collections for just a minute briefly and then open it up to questions, but I do want to show you one other slide. Can you see this sales slide? Okay, good. I realize that the laws that govern California recycling and maybe the focus of this commission is not about sales for the industry, but I think it's important to recognize that we know that about right now, 85% or so of the flow of post-consumer carpet comes from the rip out of old carpet when you're replacing it with new. And so to the extent that sales drop, that makes it more difficult to ensure that you're going to get enough post-consumer carpet to feed the capacity that you're investing in, okay? So there's some multiple logistical steps that we're trying to balance here. Unfortunately, you could see what happened is people are talking about not having enough post-consumer carpet right now. Until about 1 year ago this time, we had more flow of carpet than we had capacity to absorb it. So our focus was on market development, product development, trying to create demand for the material to create the pull-through that justified the increasing in collections. Now that we've got that, that was our emphasis as we turned into late 2019 and going into 2020 until we see what happens here. You can see what sales have been doing year on year. We had the precipitous drop attributable to COVID-19. And it looks like right now, the recovery for that, the budget that we're working on right now is a small increase over what we saw in 2020. So that exacerbates the ability to expand the collections right now as well. And of course, the sale of new carpet is what funds the program. We've been fortunate to have built up a bit of a reserve or an excess reserve in the funds, which are now using to facilitate both the grants and what I'll describe as the COVID Emergency Action Plan. When the virus hit and things started to shut down very quickly, CARE did an analysis and determined that we needed to take rapid action to ensure the survivability of the recyclers, especially in the state of California. We didn't want to lose the capacity that had been invested and grown over the last couple of years. So we implemented a multi-point action plan, one of which was to offer a full month's average subsidy to every recycler that had been in the business to aid their cash flow situation with the market crash that was taking place. Secondly, we made some adjustments to a number of the subsidy parameters, and those were put in place for 90 days, March, April, and May. We looked at what was going on and made a decision to extend that through the end of August. We looked at it in early August and made the decision to extend these adjustments through the end of this year. And we're in the process now of going through another analysis to find out, what's going to happen going into 2020, so we can make sure the recyclers survive and that we don't lose capacity within the state. So those are kind of the highlights that I wanted to hit for you. I want to go back to this graph and just remind us that this is not a simple challenge. There are those that'll say we've been at it for almost 10 years right now, but it took a while for the wheels to spin and gain some traction. We had some bumps and bruises along the way, but you could see since 15, we've been on a steady increasing curve. I want to highlight what the original budget in our approved plan would have taken us up to close to 30% for this year. Now with the impact of COVID, and please don't take these as firm numbers, but we're estimating right now, depending on what Q3 and Q4 look like, that we'll be able to get pretty close to that 24% mark, which is kind of remarkable considering the damage that's been done by this virus to everybody's businesses and some of the markets that we're trying to serve. So with that, John, I thought I would just open it up to any questions that the commission has and try to answer them. There's a lot of information on the CARE website, and like I said, there's almost a 500-page report where we try to share all the information that we have, both qualitatively and quantitatively, in a way that can answer all the questions. We are a learning organization, so we've evolved that process year on year.
Right. So let's open it up for a discussion. I would point out that I think Committee Member Medrano and I were appointed at CARE to their committee in about 2015. So I'm gratified to see the impact that Ms. Medrano and I had over that, turning the curve and driving it upward over the last 5 years. So we'll take our share of credit for that. But
I agree with you, John.
And I wanted to on the response, the written response from CARE, the first couple of items I think were kind of formatting of data in the report, a little bit of wonkiness probably on my part, having spent 5 years going through those 300-page reports. So thank you for the response on those, Bob. And I think the third item was one that this committee discussed, driven by a public comment about a specific study. And so there's a recommendation regarding CARE financing of studies, and maybe for ease of following along on the discussion, we start with number 3 and then work our way through the others. So that recommendation really is the studies funded by CARE, and it sounds, Bob, from the response that Cal Recycle, you don't go forward with any of these studies without Cal Recycle's knowledge.
We talk to Cal Recycle not only about plans, but we usually talk to Cal Recycle about updates along the way as we go. And so there was no surprises here in this study. Our only goal, no predetermined answers. We went to the academics, gave them money and said, do the project and give us the answers that you think are the right answers. And then we posted those to the website. I know one person got upset because they felt like we deliberately tried to hide information or not post some appendices, which was a simple mistake when posting a very large report. The person thought that the whole report was there. And in fact, the report was so big, there was the report, and then there were the appendices to the report. Having said that, that full report with the appendices was already published over a year earlier. So it was available to everybody.
Yeah, that was my fumble there. I'll take claim for that.
JC Bolden, who's the California manager, is that your kind of working title?
Yeah, sorry, John. Yeah, California Program Director.
Okay. So sorry, I'm looking at the response. Any comments on that response around the studies? So,
John,
yes.
I'll just add that we meet with Cal Recycle bi-weekly now. During the COVID, the depths of the COVID crisis, which unfortunately we seem to be back in that depth again, but we met with Cal Recycle weekly for updates. We've now switched to bi-weekly updates, and every other week is a what we call a formal deep dive report with the California staff. So we're pretty intimately tied in with everything that's going on, all the studies that we're working on, sort of advanced looks at how the recycling is going. You know, people report by the month, so even though we don't get the quarterly summaries and roll-ups until about 45 days after the quarter ends, because the recyclers have a 30-day window to report their last month of the quarter update. But we give them a feel for where things are headed in that direction as well. So I think we've reforged, I think, a very good working relationship with Cal Recycle.
Okay. Heidi Sanborn, you want to comment?
Thanks. I think one of the comments that we got early on about these studies is that they're concerned about the chemical impacts on the environment. So that one study research that was being done with the fee money up in Humboldt, I believe, where they were using recycled carpet fiber in wattles to filtrate sediment from going into Humboldt Bay without, from as far as we know, any kind of chemistry testing for PFAS or any stain protective type products that might have been put on that carpet. I remember staff from CPSC and I calling up and trying to talk to the professor at Humboldt State. They never returned our calls. But I think there's people that are much smarter than I am in science that are very concerned that Cal Recycle may not have the resources and the understanding to approve studies like that and whether they're safe or not. And that really concerns me. And I think it has to be transparent and possibly, I guess I'd just like to hear from Bob, you know, what process was gone through to ensure, one, that we would all have access to that information, and two, before and after, and two, is what are protective measures taken to make sure that chemicals of concern are not ending up in the environment during these studies?
Well, I think the way I'd answer that question is this. You know that I'm a scientist by background as well, so my search is for accurate information based on data and drawing good conclusions based on science. That's why we funded the project. We went to a professor with a reputation for working in this area at Humboldt State as an independent resource, and we worked through GHD Engineering, who's well known to Cal Recycle and Caltrans for doing all kinds of projects around the state, so we considered them both credible resources. And then we asked them to look at possible applications for these materials and to study their impact on the environment. So it's been probably 2 years now since I've looked at that data, but I'm pretty sure that there was a analysis done on PFAS. I don't remember whether Professor Finney did extraction studies before applying the fiber into the field. I know that some of the other people that have worked on this, not academic studies, but entrepreneurs, are doing extraction studies, validating that these levels are below limits before they consider doing any field work with them. And then finally, I would say that CARE can fund studies, but CARE is not the ultimate authority. So we've been very careful with the draft guidelines that we put out there for any kind of in-ground or on-ground application that says if somebody's going to go forward and do this, they're responsible for developing the data and seeking the regulatory permits and clearances before they commercialize anything. So, for example, if there was a filtration application based on some fiber from carpet and there was a concern about PFAS being on it, they would have to pass whatever the state or local ordinances are about the levels of these materials. Otherwise, they couldn't get their permits. We didn't think it was CARE's. CARE doesn't have the authority, nor are we responsible for ultimately making that determination. We don't set the laws and regulations. The state agencies and I guess the local municipalities get to do that. So if somebody wants to use these materials in that kind of application, if they can't pass the local regs, that's it. CARE's not going to say anything that says it's okay.
Can I have a follow-up, John, on this? Because this to me is really important, is you know, regulations are basically, as you know, Bob, they delay. They're often delayed. It takes years to do regulations behind sometimes the science. And I think it's up to CARE to be very, very careful and protective and maybe impose the precautionary principle. Just because there's rules there doesn't mean it's enough. And especially for things like microfibers as well. As you know, most carpet is plastic. And are these microfibers draining into the bay? What kind of studies were done? And I guess I'm just concerned. I'm not the only one. We've heard from several commenters with, again, a much higher level of science than I've ever had, but they're concerned about these studies and what's possibly being done. And they don't understand enough to know whether it's safe or not. But I think this is where it would be a good idea. I think you served on the Green Ribbon Science Panel here in California, is to work with them and make sure those scientists that are watching this stuff are feeling confident that we're not using this fee money to fund studies that could do harm, possibly. But just important that we're protective.
Yeah. I think that, the purpose of funding any study is to find out what's going on, even to the point you raised of before regulations or laws are put in place. So we ask the experts to look at the outcome and draw some conclusions for us. I will tell you, since you mentioned microfibers, that, microfibers, that we don't even have the fundamental tools in place to really accurately quantify microfibers and microplastics. They're still in development right now. I would suggest to you that the amount of microplastics coming out of the average washing machine in your home far outweigh what may be leaching out of a landfill somewhere from carpet that's disposed there. That's just an opinion. I don't have any quantitative information to back that up, but we did hold a meeting, and I think, John Manuel, you may have been there when we held that meeting in L.A. at the water treatment facility. And they gave us a tour, and they claimed that they were pumping, I think the number was 2 million gallons a day of water into the ocean, and they had no idea how much microplastic was in it, how to quantify that, or how to remove it. So, so if they can't figure it out, CARE doesn't have the resources to do that, even with the funds we get. The other thing I think it's important for people to remember is that we have a diminishing stock of older carpet in the environment, and the industry switched off of fluorinated hydrocarbons about, don't have the exact year, but I think it was about 2015. So as the existing flow is removed from the inventory, the new materials are not there. That doesn't change the microplastic side, but there shouldn't be any leaching of fluorinated chemicals at that point in time. New materials.
So Sarah Toyota, you wanted to comment?
Thank you. I really appreciate this presentation, and because one of the things we've heard a lot about is from a couple of stakeholders is that they're ready to use carpet, but they can't get any. And you had said that is actually something that's only happened fairly recently over the last year, and that you're shifting your focus toward supplying that need. And I'm just wondering if you have any more, if you can elaborate on that a little bit more. Do you know where these markets are, and have you contacted them? Is there a plan? Is there a time frame? Anything?
Yeah, if you look at the response that I made, and I think it's under question number 7, I think I said, I think it makes some bullets on additional activities. Wait a minute, let me make sure, Commissioner, I've got the right reference to that. I tried to put in some of the activities that CARE currently has going on around the collections question.
Yeah, it is number 7.
It is number 7.
Starting on page 5, PDF.
Yeah, that's what I've got in front of me. Yeah. So let me, if I can, just make a couple quick comments. Yeah. Number one is that we know that we have a private collection network in the state of California that's run by individual companies that comprises, I think, nominally about 100 at any given time. It fluctuates a little bit with season and how people's business is going, but sort of a base of 160 that could swell up to 180 or more private collection sites. And we kind of believe that the private sector is more efficient at doing this than the public sector. So we don't want to compete with the public sector, but also to meet our statutory requirements of convenient collection as it's defined in the newly approved plan. We have over 80. We have 81, I believe, collection sites today in 53 counties of the 58. The remaining counties have been either reluctant or recalcitrant for any number of reasons, and we continue to work on those. We just hired Mary Pitto, who retired from her previous position as somebody that has excellent relationships with the rural counties in particular, to try to work to see if we could find out a way to move forward with getting them on board. We're trying to do some creative incentives to facilitate that. We recognize that the collection of the next increment of pounds, let me back up and say, everybody's picked sort of the low-hanging fruit. Any space that you could put a 48 or 53-foot trailer that's going to fill up a couple times a week or once every couple of weeks has been tapped. So the next level of collections becomes much more difficult. Either it's a space restriction, they don't have room for a large container, or maybe in some cases a container at all, or they have a landlord that will not permit them to put a bin like that on their property, or their volume is so low. You're talking about turning a trailer once every 6 months or more. So we're trying to find ways to consolidate collection sites to facilitate the installers in those areas to come together, as opposed to just dispersing a bunch of bins that sit. You pay storage fees, and they can't do anything for 6 or 8 or 9 months to turn that container. So that's kind of number 2. Number 3 is we recently opened up a really nice dialogue with one of the large installer houses in California. They agreed, based on our request, to do an analysis of their sales to determine how often they go in to install a hard surface that a soft surface is being removed. We were a little surprised by this. The number came back at about 35%. We thought it was down in single digits. So that says that if you've got that large of a percentage being ripped out, carpet being ripped out when they're installing hard surfaces, and we've not been talking to hard surface retailers, that we've now started to open a dialogue with hard surface retailers and hard surface installers who were not aware that you could recycle carpet, didn't know how to recycle carpet, didn't know where to recycle carpet. So that's another major initiative that we've got underway. Another one is we host what are called tabling events. So supply houses where installers go to pick up their supplies. When they're having little events, we'll go in there and do an educational session and make them aware of where and how they can recycle their materials. We're looking at some creative ways to do further incentives on that. And perhaps one of the bigger ones that we've got going on right now is that, and we started this just before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic caused this to go on hold until just recently, is there's a couple major regional distribution centers in California for carpet sales. You know, the big mills ship it into California, goes to a warehouse, and then the retailer or his installers come to that warehouse, pick up their goods for installation. So we saw that as a central point where if we could do a deal where we make carpet recycling available on that site, it becomes a one-stop shop for the installer. He doesn't have to rip out, drive to a landfill or a recycle center farther away, and then come back the next day, pick up his new load at another location. Time and money. If we could give it a one-stop shop location, that'll be more efficient, more cost-effective, and maybe no cost for that person to get rid of that carpet at that point in time. And there's a pretty good volume of carpet that flows through the regional distribution centers. So that one's going on, and we hope the first RDC pilot for this will be up and running by late January of next year. We have run into a couple of roadblocks with people I mentioned earlier, either landlords saying you can't do that on our property, or that there's a liability issue and they don't want to accept the liability for having somebody come in and throw recycled material into a bin on their property. That's the sort of high-level answer of the things that are going on to push carpet recycling. I guess I'd also say that we've recently opened up a new dialogue with the recyclers to specifically focus on enhancing collections. We've had an issue recently that we'll describe as predatory pricing, where through the use of grant funds and subsidies, an existing collector goes in and buys business away from another collector by lowering the price. And, I try to make us a learning organization, and we've learned from 3 events in the past that people that have done this have done two things. One, they've eventually gone out of business because it's an unsustainable business model. We've had 3 examples of this, both in Northern and Southern California. And the second thing is that when it happens, it goes on for a period of time, and it creates a lot of financial upheaval and damage to the folks that remain in business because they've had to lower their prices to compete. So we're trying to deal with that one as well.
So we have a couple of minutes, and we've got 3 committee members who want to speak. Bob, and I know you need to leave very, very shortly. So I think, I hope we can continue the dialogue. Committee Sanborn and I are a subcommittee around these. So, and I want to plant the thought with you and JC. If there are recommendations you'd like to bring forward about how we might help on the market development aspects of the program, please think about that. And I think Ann Schneider was first, then Sarah Toyota and Heidi Sanborn.
Just going backward, thank you for the presentation. Going backwards, when you said that you're finding that the hardwood refinishing is coming back, but that to me means more area rugs. How do area rugs and carpets fit into carpet recycling?
Area rugs and padding were explicitly excluded from the original law. I actually had some conversations several years ago about the idea of when a carpet recycler handles carpet, if there's padding involved, he handles the padding. Padding is basically a self-sustained market. There's a market out there for the urethane pad that's pulled up out from underneath the carpet. In fact, most recyclers use that as a way to diversify their business model. If they were just doing pure carpet, most of them couldn't survive. They need the revenue from the pad. So at some point in the future, John, that could become a recommendation. I think that's a really good question. I've also been asked about other materials, but that's beyond the scope of care at this point in time. We've had to stick to our statutory definition of carpet recycling.
Thank you. John, as I have slowly been restoring every floor in this almost 100-year-old house. So most of the carpet is gone. I did put in some recycled carpet, but I have a lot of area rugs, and you tend to swap them out more frequently.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question because
No, that's okay. It's just I hadn't dawned on it, and I'm standing on one right now saying at its end of life, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
It's a textile. It's a textile, man.
Yeah, since it's not covered, it was explicitly excluded from the original 2398 language. We don't focus on that.
Thank you.
Sarah Toyota.
And you all can talk about this maybe a little when you follow up. But we were just talking about construction and demolition, and is there something during that phase of taking down or taking apart a house or whatever and collecting carpet that there's a legislation or some policy that would help you collect clean carpet, help you move that carpet out? Just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as well. I don't want to take up too much more time talking about it now.
Yep, that's okay. And it's a good suggestion. We've talked about this before. One of the biggest problems we got is a lot of times when they deconstruct or demolish, they use the carpet as a way to keep down the dust, bring down all the debris, and then they roll it up. And when you contaminate the carpet like that, it becomes extremely difficult to recycle it at that point.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Oh, John, can I just add one more thing, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
And I did send a text to try to push back the next call a little bit here because I think this is important. If you think about carpet, or if you know anything about the construction of carpet, about half the weight of a carpet is the face fiber, which is a thermoplastic, and that's where the value is in the marketplace. The other half of the carpet is the backing, which is primarily composed of calcium carbonate, which, as you know, is an inert mineral, strip mined out of the earth and used it's called limestone when you take it out of the earth. It's used as the key raw material for Portland cement. CARE launched an initiative several years ago and was able to build a market outlet for what we call PC4, post-consumer carpet calcium carbonate. as a way to improve our yields and avoid having to send half of the weight that we collect when we process it back to the landfill anyway. So our yields at the beginning were only about 38 to 40%. Our yields today are over 70% of all the carpet that gets processed.
Heidi Sandborn, and then we have a public comment and presenter waiting. So, Heidi.
I'll keep this quick, and then Bob can speak to any of these 4 things if you'd like. I guess I'm not sure that predatory pricing is the right way to frame what feels like a free market system where companies can decide if they want to reduce their cost and go out and get work. If they go out of business for doing that, isn't that on them? Isn't that part of the free market system? So I don't know if you want to speak to that. I've got a couple of others.
Okay, thank you. Let me just respond quickly to that. Based on the historical experience, we felt we had to do something. I think I 100% agree with you. If this was purely free market driven, I'd have no problem with it whatsoever. But we're using public funds to pay out subsidies and grants. And if what we're doing is just redistributing the pie, so to speak, as opposed to growing the pie, that's not the way to make this program successful.
At least we'll leave that one there. Then the money for collection, it seems to me it's really a simple thing. If we pay people enough, they will do it. So, as far as the collection, I mean, to me, we went from 8% at the beginning of this program. We're up to almost 20%. We're supposed to be at 24, but that's really just a little over 1% a year for a decade's worth of investment in a program where we should be having the benefits of low-hanging fruit early on. I just think it's not going to work until we start funding collection and fund the haulers and others who touch this stuff and the installers to manage it, because it's a cost. Do you want to speak to that?
It is not an easy answer. It is an extremely complex economic question because it ties in the sales of new carpet. It ties in the level of funding required to sustain a program like that and expand that level of payment. As the sales continue to drop, the assessment would have to go up to points where it would just be autocatalytic and accelerate the decline in sales as alternate materials are available without those environmental fees associated with them. So to me, it's a delicate balance. We are spending a huge amount of time trying to assess what it's costing to recycle a pound of every different kind of carpet face fiber there is, the backing materials associated with that carpet, trying to parse out the difference between commercial broadloom, residential broadloom, and commercial tile. And unfortunately, everybody believes that tile is the most recyclable, most user-friendly material, yet I have to tell the commission here that there's been virtually no tile recycled out of California in the last couple of years. We're trying to find ways to enhance reuse, and we have a new thrust going into 2021 to try to really jumpstart tile recycle. So all I could say is stand by. That's going to be another push in 2021.
The question was about cost for collection. I don't know how we got too far off into tile, but the bottom line is it feels to me like the concern is more about the sales of carpet instead of about whether you're collecting the carpet and paying people the fair amount that it costs them to touch the carpet, keep it clean and dry, and move it. And I still think that's a key to making this work. And then that also raises the issue of all flooring. I don't think the only reason, and this is debatable amongst the economics experts, but this fee is causing a huge drift to harder surfaces. I think there's a lot of reasons people are moving to harder surfaces, including allergies. There's a lot of perception about the sanitary nature or not of carpet and being able to clean up easier with flooring. People have dogs, more dogs. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. But anyway, does CARE have any position on whether we include all flooring in a program? Would that be level the playing field for carpet?
I think the way I'd answer that question right now is that CARES focuses the statutory requirements of 2398 and the subsequent laws that we've passed. We're not involved in alternative flooring. I think that's a whole separate conversation that has to be had.
Okay, except a lot of the manufacturers that make carpet also make hard flooring materials as well.
Well, I'm not sure that that's an accurate statement. There are, I think today our newest number is 79 mills or distributors associated with selling carpet in California. The top 10 sell 95% of the carpet, but they're not all even integrated with hard surfaces. So the vast majority are carpet-only mills.
Okay, let's take,
One more is about the disposal ban. Does Kara have any position about the disposal ban?
I think I responded that in the write-up I sent you back.
Yeah.
I said I don't believe we should have a ban without having a plan, and since there is not a plan, that has to come first.
We'll come back on that one. We have a public comment, and then we really do need to move on. So.
Sure.
Okay.
We have one public comment from Doug Cobold with California Product Stewardship Council. This is a question for Bob. The current visible fee of 35 cents per square yard is currently covering the cost to recycle less than 24% of the estimated carpet generated today. Since there appears to be larger capacity to collect and process carpet as compared to prior years, how does CARE plan to accommodate the potentially significant increase in collected carpet using existing fees? If the collected carpet were to go to 50% of all carpet generated, for example, how will those costs be covered? That's been published.
Can I ask the source of that comment?
Yes, it's Doug Cobold, that California Product Stewardship Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think the way I'd answer that question is that I don't know the answer to that question right now. If we were to double the collections, and to Commissioner Sanborn's point, we would have to pay more to do that. How we would fund that has to be worked out. It's an economic question. It sounds relatively simple. I think it's a little more complex than that, because if it was just one flooring type, it might be pretty easy. But we have 5 major polymer types that we're dealing with. We have really 3 major market segments. You got pure residential, you got, multifamily housing, and you have the pure commercial side of the equation. And then you have broadloom and tile materials, not to mention the different types of backing. So I think, AB 729 spoke to differential fees. And we are digging in hard trying to understand how you implement differential fees based on what it's costing us to recycle these various elements in the marketplace. I think we've all had our eyes open a little bit about what we assume is the case is probably not when you look at the hard numbers, and we're still trying to get our minds around that. So I think the simple answer for Doug is that we don't have that answer right now.
So let's revisit this. Committee member Sanborn and I be in the subcommittee at this moment, and take Doug's comment, take the CARES response, and bring it back on a later agenda.
Hey, John.
Bob, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think everybody's aware of this, but I also want to make sure the committee is aware, and maybe the commission becomes aware that we're in the middle of a second round of a very deep economic analysis with Crow. They're an independent firm in California, well known and respected by Cal Recycle, doing a deep dive into what are the actual costs for recycling, and that'll complement the work of our model team and our differential assessments team. So.
Right. Yeah. So we'll continue this dialogue. It's obviously a unique program, and I think look forward to more conversation. And thank Bob and JC for joining us today and responding so quickly to the comments that we sent to them. So we were scheduled to take a break, but I'm going to suggest that we not. Because Nick Lapis has been standing by, and he has a short window, which is now narrowed. And so I want to take advantage of Nick's expertise on landfill tip fee increase to support market development. we quickly arrived at Nick at you as a source of discussion outside the commission, and just because of your ongoing involvement in this, and maybe you could start by characterizing, the efforts that have gone on for years to try to advance this in the legislature.
Sure, and I do apologize about the timing. I'm literally outside of my dentist's office and I have an appointment at 11:30, so it gives us about 20 minutes. This is a complicated issue. We have worked on it. The legislature has worked on it for a long time. I believe the first time we introduced a bill on increasing the tip fee was back in, I want to say 2014 with Doss Williams. Might have been 2015. The general thinking, and I don't know how much you guys have already talked about this, but the general thinking is that our landfill tip fees have not kept up with inflation, even if nothing else, not to mention the increased workload we give CalRecycle, which I'm probably as guilty of as anybody. So every time we pass a bill and ask CalRecycle to implement it and give them no additional funding, that all comes out of their integrated waste management account, which is funded by the $1.40 tip fee surcharge, which has not gone up since 1993, I believe. And so the Brown administration had an interest of updating the fee, both to fund their internal programs, but also to use for market development and to use for organics infrastructure. The problem is that thanks to Prop 26, an increase in the tip fee would be a 2/3 vote. When it was originally raised, it was a majority vote, but that was before Prop 26. So with Prop 26, it would be a 2/3 vote. And what that means realistically is that any stakeholder can sort of veto the idea. And there were conversations going back and forth with the governor's office that they facilitated, and we just could not reach an agreement. And I've sort of come to the conclusion, not to say that this is what your recommendation should be, but I've sort of come to the conclusion that focusing on increasing the landfill tip fee is probably not the best use of our time, even though I agree with the policy. And the reason I say that is the big public waste haulers have made it abundantly clear that they would oppose any increase in the tip fee. And their fear is that they're going to get stuck with it. That, most of the contracts have a pass through, but they're going to somehow get stuck with it. Whether they're right or they're wrong, it's a 2/3 vote bill. So I think it's a long shot, and I have not been focused on that specifically for the last few years. But there was another concept that came up a couple of years ago, and that was an idea of a generator charge. And the thinking there being that it could be a fee placed directly on garbage bills. And if you look at your cable bill, your phone bill, any other bill, there's a series of state fees on there. It would be per household. It would be statewide. And then we could use that money to invest in infrastructure. The advantage of that, as opposed to individual rate increases, is that no local government has to take a difficult vote to, raise rates. It's automatic. You can blame the state. You don't have to go through a 218 process because there's no decision making that's actually happening at the local level. And so it's just a way to have the funding for the state mandates come from the state, fee requirements. I personally really like that idea, but there's been pushback on that idea as well. I don't think anybody has said that it's a complete non-starter, but there are definitely folks who feel like we should be collecting the money more upstream at the landfill gate as opposed to chasing down 40 million Californians on their garbage bills and logistically having to collect it from individuals is going to be harder, and that it would just make a lot more sense to collect it upstream. And that's a frequent criticism. And that's kind of the conversation we've been having for the last couple of years. Eric's been in the middle of a lot of these conversations too. I don't know, Eric, if you want to chime in.
Sure. A couple things. Just to be clear, that would also be a 2/3 bill, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Just a couple things on the generator fee. Our issue has always been, there's been a couple issues. One, some of the administration headaches that Nick pointed out to. The other is it doesn't deal with the behavioral incentive that we're trying to deal with, which is get rid of disposal. If we're just charging everybody across the board, even our high-end recyclers and composters at the curb that are doing technically the right thing. So that's always been sort of a mental hurdle for me on that issue. The tip fee, I don't disagree with Nick's analysis. The one thing that we've been starting to get interested in is this idea, because it is so easy to sort of apply, it's just based on a disposal tonnage. What if we moved the responsibility for paying that tip fee off of landfills and off a rate base and more towards the sort of a extended producer responsibility model, which is basically, we know who the manufacturers of this material is. We know what's getting put into the landfill through waste characterizations. Let's just do a simple calculation and charge that fee to a stewardship organization, which would then generate the types of revenues we're talking about we need for infrastructure.
Yeah, well, so that's a new concept that has just recently come up. It's a really interesting concept. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's still another 2/3, right?
I think anything you want to do when it comes to funding infrastructure, we're going to run into the two. I don't think you can get around the 2/3 issue. So as well, what I like about it is it puts the onus on obviously the producers, but if they want to get that fee down, then they have complete flexibility under that system to figure out how to get that fee down, which is get their stuff out of the landfill. If they want to make direct investments into infrastructure, start up take-back programs, those are all things that they could do to help effectuate that disposal number.
But they could also choose just to fight the bill.
We're going to run into that no matter what we do, we'll run into opposition on a 2/3 bill.
So that's kind of the background. Candidly, this is why I think the ballot measure is the right approach for funding, because we sort of hit dead ends exploring these different options. John, I don't know if there's any, I don't know if you just wanted me to give that background or if there's anything else.
No, I mean, this is great. And, I'm one who believes the wasters should pay, and whether they pay through I mean, the product stewardship approach is intriguing, but my goodness, how many different materials are we dealing with? And I'll try to get my mind around that. So I like the simple one at landfill, but I know it's been a futile effort. And yet, if we're going to have infrastructure, we need to find a way to induce that. So I think that's, to me it's like adding wine and liquor to the CRD program. It makes all kinds of sense and goes nowhere. So, but we do have, while you're here, Ann Schneider and Heidi Sanborn have asked to comment. So Ann had her hand up first. Ann, are you here? Heidi, why don't you go?
I'm sorry, I passed, John. Pass.
Okay, pass. All right, Heidi.
Thanks for bringing this discussion up. I think it's important. And I agree with Nick that I think it's a little like we've got so much low-hanging fruit stuff we could be dealing with at the commission right now. This is such a holy war type of fight. And I agree with Eric and with John that I don't like socialization of costs. I just don't think that it gets to the root of the problem by having the producers pay for what they put on the market. Now, if the new model discussion, because to me, EPR means the producers run, and for their own products, which by the way, I think BC is up to 24 different products and it's all running fine up there, categories. And I really feel like having the state run a fee, the complications and the cost of that are off the charts. I can't even imagine. We are having a hard time managing the bottle bill with 4% of the waste stream. I can't even figure how this would work. So I guess I would like to keep things simple. I think the socialization of costs is going backwards. I definitely think the producers need to pay for the cost of the products that they've got being put into the landfills and the infrastructure, but I also think they need to help pay for the infrastructure to manage their material. So I'm just wondering, if I personally think a generator fee is pretty much just as untenable as a landfill fee at this point. And if we get EPR approaches, it's going to start taking the burden off of all of this. So that's my thinking. And I'm happy to talk, Nick, or have a discussion with the committee about it.
Nick, did you want to chime in on?
I did, but Manuel was, I think, ahead of me. No? Okay. Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said, Heidi. And it took a while for me to be won over by the generator fee because I definitely like the syntax part of the landfill fee. The one thing that sort of convinced me that the generator fee might make sense in this context is that it's for organics infrastructure and we don't have manufacturers. We don't have producers. I mean, we do. We have farmers, but we're not going to assess a fee on farmers. It's an exception to my usual staunch polluter pays take on things, because it's organics specifically. And to Eric's point, I think some of those issues are solvable in terms of, making sure it's equitable based on how much, the existing investments by residents. You could do it based on how much differential fee based on cart size. You could do a differential fee based on recycling rate for a jurisdiction. There are a lot of ways to make it more complicated, but generally speaking, I just don't see anybody very excited about it, especially not excited enough to fight for a 2/3 vote.
So Manuel and Eric, I think we're next.
Just wanted to ask Commissioner Sambor to clarify because you were shaking your head when the comment about 2/3 votes were needed for an EPR scheme.
No, they're not unless it's a visible fee. See, internalized cost is never a 2/3 vote.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. It's the tip fee proposals are all 2/3.
Right.
Eric?
Just to comment on what Nick was saying around the organics funding. I mean, at the end of the day, if that's what a generator fee is doing, it's just cosmetic. At the end of the day, you're still going back to the rate base to pay for this. Plenty of jurisdictions right now are in the middle of their 1383 rate making process to deal with things like infrastructure, deal with things like organics collection. So it feels like we'd be creating a whole lot of government administration over revenue that's still hitting the same group that all the jurisdictions are dealing with right now on rate making. And just so you can say that, oh, we don't have much choice in this, and this is a fee that just has to go through on the rate making piece. So I don't really know what gets us accomplished other than being able to sort of blame another mechanism versus not by going through versus what we're doing right now. It doesn't feel like new money, I guess, is my feeling on it if we're just going back to the rate base.
No, I completely agree. It's not new money, and it is another way to. It's a way to do the rate increases without having 450 jurisdictions go through the process. But I agree with everything you said, Eric.
Sarah, Toyota.
I feel like it's really important that we look at the low-hanging fruit right now and really kind of focus on that. But I do remember when we talked to Jared Bloomfeld about, what he wanted, and he said, in the end, I want a roadmap. And so once we really get what we can do within January, this low-hanging fruit and all that, I think that turning our focus toward more of a roadmap and long-term things like EPR, where you're actually incentivizing people to create products or whatever we're recycling or diverting long-term causes those actions and creates that. And I believe that EPR is the long road, the long road to get there, or the actual way to get there. So taking it off the board or not really considering that, it might not be something to do now, but in the end, if we're going to build that road or make that map, we're going to have to really consider, I think, EPR.
So I know Nick needs to leave and we need to move on. I'm starting to cogitate around, maybe there's no single solution. Maybe there's a series of material specific. Some are EPR, some might be landfill bans, but we get there with content regulations. And I think the success of the plastic beverage container, and Nick, we talked earlier about glass food and beverage containers that are sold in California rather than manufactured. So I think between the EPR, minimum content, maybe some outright bans of material, there's a way to get there and get the funding shifted away from the ratepayers. So put that thought out for future discussion, Nick.
I'll just say I love the idea of expanding the recycled content mandate to things sold in California. I think that's how it should have been from the beginning.
Good. Yeah, and I don't, well, as a consumer of French wine, I'm concerned we need to learn what the French are doing, make sure they can meet that standard. But that's just me. Okay, well, it is 11:29. You have 1 minute to go in and get your teeth yanked.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. All right. Yeah, we skipped our break, but let's just maybe finish the agenda early if we can. So we're a little bit behind, but I actually don't know that we have much on the next item, response to public comments. Kate's been really good about trying to pull together all the comments. They are in Google Doc or the Google Drive. And so at some point, and I'm thinking it'll probably be, may not be over the next month, but at some point we want to just go back through, and if you have the chance, take a look at the comments we've received previously and consider them in the light of our discussion. Make sure, that we're responding to those comments, but maybe there were suggestions that we overlooked early that might inform our discussions. So there are several dozen comments that we've received. Nothing specific today. Outside of Doug Colwell's comment around carpet, it sounds like Heidi Sanborn and I need to spend some time reviewing our carpet recommendations in light of the discussion today. It's a complicated topic. I always view it, I look at the mattress program, which just seems to have free and convenient collection, and then I look at carpet, which doesn't. But I know that mattress kind of fed right into an existing infrastructure. Carpet had to build the infrastructure to receive the material. But the more they move in that direction, feeding that infrastructure becomes more important. So you always have to ask, what time are we? and so I look forward to those discussions. Anybody else have thoughts about comments we've received? If not, we're right on schedule.
Chair Davis, could I revisit? Yes. I have one outstanding public comment that was made on agenda item 4, which is when, yes. And the topic was GHG emission reduction for recycling. That's the subject of the comment. This is from Gail Bryce. And so, Lana, if you want to mark this down for agenda item 4, again, Gail Bryce, it would be very helpful if, besides just correcting the GHG emission reduction benefits for recycling calculations, that the program was expanded to create more value for recycling as offsets for cap and trade, and also to sell to companies wanting to reduce carbon footprint. For example, based on independent life cycle analyses, the planned XT Green facility would have an annual GHG emission reduction benefit equivalent to the carbon sequestered by planting 20 million trees. If we could monetize this benefit, it would be very helpful to us and also be a tool to attract other recycling facilities into California. And that was published this morning.
Yeah, so I attended a webinar last week on green bonds, which are, I think, and Member Sanborn may be well aware because one of the presenters was SMUD. And so there's a market, an emerging market for projects that have green attributes, and also climate bonds for projects that can claim and demonstrate climate reduction attributes. So I think we have not talked a lot about financing outside of the narrow discussion around RMBZ and trying to grow that fund, which just became more complicated. But I think these green and climate bonds might be something we look at. And one of the distinctions there is the verification process. Whether someone, as we saw with Sabrac, you can claim to have recycled content but not have to verify it. So that interesting field to contemplate, and there definitely are some financing options around investors who are looking to support sustainable projects. But, Ann Schneider, I think you wanted to comment.
This is going to sound a little bit out there, John, Commissioner Davis. What if we had something along the lines of the Williamson Act? The Williamson Act that tries to save farmland, but we had a Williamson Act to protect or be a means of supporting anything in the reuse, repair, recycling, compost infrastructure.
You're talking about preserving.
I'm talking about land.
Yeah,
it would be a land banking, but it would be a way to protect critical infrastructure close in. Now, this is not the paper pulping concept, but definitely anything on the reuse repair side usually has to be close in. They're going to get pushed out because land values keep escalating. But to me, they're essential. To me, they need to be recognized. And if we had tools to protect that land, yikes, as it reduces long-term property tax increases, but it might be a way to also help recognize and keep these businesses.
I would suggest, as you're working on the reuse,
to dive into the Williamson Act and see if it can translate over. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I'm thinking there's a really good article today when we were talking earlier about historic preservation. Gustavo Arellano from Los Angeles Times columnist wrote a column on a land use issue that really hits into historic preservation and community benefit, and and the fact that it's not always a clear distinction. Maybe.
In today's, I hate to admit it, I do not get the LA Times up here in the Bay Area, but LA Times today, the 16th.
Yeah, you can read it online. Yeah. If you need, I'll send you the link. Under the columns, Gustavo Arellano. So, but it's an interesting aspect because this had to do with a historic building that housed institutional use that had great community benefits. They're trying to sell it to realize the gain. And the preservationists are trying to protect it, which reduces the value. So I think that comes to mind when you're talking about reuse businesses. I'm not sure a lot of those businesses own their property. There's a lot of them are probably tenants, and but
well, definitely consignment stores, most likely, because they pop up and then they go out as soon as rents go out.
Yeah, they're low margin businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and our next topic is data requests, and I think I'd like to suggest that we get some information when Cal Recycle can discuss the proposals they've received under the reuse grant, that we get a briefing on that. We could certainly get a briefing on the grant RFP parameters, but I suspect we'd be more interested, or at least I would be more interested in knowing what proposals they received, and either without maybe specific, but generally characterizing what sorts of assistance people were asking for, and how that might inform our discussions. I'm not sure who to direct it toward, but I'd be glad to try to dive into
that. To interrupt, Chair Davis, that sounds like a data request, which is a perfect segue into the next item, if you would like to.
Yeah, exactly. I was moving, and so I was bumping us along. So maybe a data request on the reuse grant proposals that were received, if and when they're ready to do that, and once they make funding recommendations, clearly that's public. I'm not sure how much we can get while they're deliberating over those recommendations.
Okay.
And it would have to do more with the content, either generally or specifically, of proposals that they received.
Okay. There was another potential data request earlier. This was when Greg was talking about Cal Green. So I just want to go back to it and see if you want to make an official data request. Getting data on C&D facilities, or how many businesses do take. I kind of missed it, but I heard some of that part. So if I can.
Yeah, I think that was.
We can get that down. Mm-hmm.
Manuel, yeah.
Yeah, it was to understand the type of facilities that are collecting C&D and to what effect, and that would include reuse and repair facilities, salvagers throughout the state. If we're going to make a recommendation to address this market, I think we need to have a little bit of information on what the processing is out there in the state.
Okay.
That was
Got it.
All right, and so I think I've got a couple of follow-ups, with one with Sarah Toyota on the C&D issues, and one with Heidi Sanborn to get back into carpet. But those, I think, are not so much data requests at this point. So.
There were a few data requests from last, so I'm looking at the notes. So we did present on Cal Green. There is still the outstanding request for clarification on Chair Sanborn's SABRAC question, which Zoe has been ready to address at multiple meetings. So we'll see if she can get to it on Wednesday. She's not here right now. She's prepping for a briefing, unfortunately. And then there was a request for Cal Recycle to give an update on consolidated permitting process, and if there are any pilots related to that. I did reach out to Mark DeBee, who's the Deputy Director of Waste Permitting Compliance and Mitigation, and I asked him if there had been any projects. He says, my specific question, so I have the context. Has Cal Recycle done any projects through this process, I asked. And Mark said, we have not. There was an attempt a number of years ago to have Cal EPA manage the process for a dairy digester project, but it was never completed. So happy still if you want someone to come discuss that, but I have that answer for you. So any follow-up data requests?
Yeah, and I think we've been asking that of some of the other agencies as we have dialogue with them, and kind of getting the same answer. So it looks to be a null hypothesis. All right. Any other requests that anybody wants to put forward? if not,
Chair Davis, I just had one unrelated question. Someone did ask if those the questions you asked of CARE were available and their answers, and I believe the document, you have posted a document to the Google Drive with the questions and CARE.
Document is on Google.
Okay,
yes,
perfect.
The document is on Google Drive. If someone isn't able to access to Google Drive, please contact me and I'll be glad to share the document. Yeah, I'm trying to make sure that everything that we might be discussing or any working documents between, for example, we extracted the carpet comments specifically for CARE to look at, so that those carpet preliminary recommendations are on Google Drive as well as CARE's response, so you can put it in a context if anybody wants to look at it. So I'm trying to keep up with the Google Drive content. Unfortunately, because of the meeting schedule, I end up like working Sunday afternoon to prepare language that ends up Monday morning on the drive. So it's just the way this work is flowing. So we are meeting, I believe, we don't meet we're outside of our 2 weeks because we are scheduled to meet on the first Monday.
You are scheduled to meet next on November 30th.
Oh, we do have November 30th. So we're every other week. It's
yes.
Yes, we are every second week. Okay, November 30th. So
well, it's actually November 30th, and then we do have one scheduled for December 7th, which would be the next week. I believe you wanted to get a couple meetings in there before mid-December.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so really like to bring recommendations forward. We sent a bunch forward and then brought them back and kind of broke them into more digestible parts. So I think we've got a couple of meetings that maybe in 2 weeks we can narrow the focus on the Cal Recycle recommendations, the loan program recommendations. It sounds like I'll be removing any recommendation around the tip fee, but maybe leave the analysis in there showing how much value it's lost, 82.5%. Nick said it hadn't increased since 1993. It was established in 93, and then there was a bump, a 7-cent bump in 95 is what I'm reading in the legislation. So, but we can leave that in there without moving it to a recommendation. We have a lot of things that we brought up today that we're going to have to digest, but I really hope we can move some recommendations forward and get them to the commission. I think we're closest on Cal Recycle. The consolidated permit, again, it's on the books. Why it hasn't been used, I think, is an open question. But maybe we can, maybe Junie or Sanborn and I can massage the GoBiz recommendations in conjunction with the consolidated permit and maybe some of the Cal Recycle recommendations, try to come up with rather than split it by agencies, but look more at the permitting function generally. So let's see what we can do between now and the 30th and try to move this forward. So I would ask if anybody has any closing thoughts. Not. So we skipped our 5-minute break, so we gained 5 minutes, and we can close the meeting now. And we'll see you all Wednesday at the commission and back together as a committee on November 30th. Thanks all. Good meeting.
Bye, everyone.